In 2024, China's birth rate showed a surprising rebound. The country recorded around 9.5 million births. This is 500,000 more than in 2023. This marks the first time since 2017 that the number of births has increased. But the big question is, can this reverse the trend of a declining population, or is it just temporary? One reason for this increase could be the delayed impact of the COVID lockdowns in 2022. Many couples who put off marriage or starting a family during that time ended up having kids in 2024. Another factor is that 2024 is the year of dragon. In Chinese culture, the year of dragon is seen as a lucky year to have children, and it only comes around every 12 years. But neither of these factors seems likely to have a lasting impact. If we want to understand what might happen in the future, we can just look at the marriage rates. As of November 2024, fewer than 4.8 million couples registered for marriage. That's the lowest number in 40 years. So why are young Chinese no longer having kids? The economic concerns play a huge role, but are there deeper factors at play? Today, I want to explore this question with my colleague and good friend Aaron. We're both born and raised in China. We're both in our late 20s and early 30s, and neither of us has kids. Together, we want to share our observations and personal perspectives on China's declining birth rate.
Okay, good morning, Amber.
Morning, Aaron.
Can I ask you why you don't want to have kids?
I don't have kids yet. Yeah, it is a good question. I don't have kids yet. But honestly, I do want to have kids. I have the plan to have the kids in the future.
Okay, what's missing in the plan?
Yeah, I think it's just it feels like the interrogation from my parents and grandparents' generations. We just keep pushing you to have kids. But to me, I think one of the most important reasons is just the preparation. You need the time to prepare mentally and financially. I think one of the biggest change in China is that compared to our parents' generation, we typically start our career later in our life, compared to our parents. For instance, I graduated from college by age, I think 22, and then I went to the graduate school. I got my master's degree. By the point that I got out of school, I'm already 22. And I need a couple of years to find a job and sort of figure out what's going on in my career life, figure out what I want to do, which city I want to live in, even which country I want to live in. So all of that takes time. So by the time I came back to China and decided that I do want to live here for the majority of my time, I was already 28. So, right? So that's very different from our parents' generation. Most of our parents' generation, I believe they started working by age 18. So even if they went to college, they probably start working by age 22. So there is a gap in terms of by what time you actually get your life started. Yeah, so I guess it's just a matter of time. You do need some time to prepare for yourself financially and most importantly, mentally, because you have to figure out what's going on with your own life before you can figure out when you're going to have the kids.
Yeah, so Spring Festival is getting close and the interrogation will come up again. So
yes, I think
you have to hurry up.
Yes, this is a very typical thing from the Chinese parents. They ask whether you plan to have the kids in the upcoming years, especially during the Spring Festival. But actually, luckily, I don't think my parents do that often. But I have to say, this is a very common thing in Chinese family.
Yeah, Amber, what you have described is a very natural process of thinking. Mm-hmm. And in my view, what you have described does not explain why China nowadays have a dramatic decrease in the fertility rate. So let me share with you a picture. Take a look at this. This one is the comparison of the fertility rate between China and Japan. And let me explain.
The red line is China,
yes,
right?
Let me translate. The red line is China and the blue line is Japan. So right now, this number only ends up in 2022. But as we know, in 2023 and 2024, things get worse, not getting better. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're having this conversation. If you look at the fertility rate, the curve, according to what you have described, well, the fertility rate in China should decrease gradually. That's a natural process when people getting richer, when women get more and more educated, and they are more financially independent, the fertility rate will gradually decrease. But take a look at the graph. The fertility rate does not decrease in a gradual manner. It's a dramatic decline. Looks like a disaster.
So it was peaking in what year?
It's around
2017,
2018. As you can see, that's almost before the China-US trade war. Well, I think it's a coincidence. No, everybody know what happened after 2020, right? All I want to say is that this curve is not normal. But what you have described, your concerns, what you have been thinking about giving birth to kids is a natural thinking process. That's natural, but this one is not natural. So something else happened that leads to what we are facing today, the lower fertility rate, even lower than Japan in China right now.
One interesting thing I noticed is that if you look at the charts, the last time the fertility rate was peaking was around 2017, right? And if you date back and look at back in 1990, I believe the fertility rate was peaking before the one child policy right was introduced. So that's actually not a coincidence, meaning if you look at the year 2017, that's when most of the children born under the one child policy went into the age suitable for having children, right? If you are the only child born under the one child policy, you grew up in a completely different environment compared to everybody else. So I'm actually born under that policy. I was born in 1995. I'm the only child in the family. So basically when you grow up, all you have is your own, pretty much. You don't really have a sibling to play with, which makes you kind of feel that it's okay to not have any kids, and it would be actually fine to be on your own. I think this is actually not a coincidence, just looking at this chart.
Yeah, you're right. There's a baby boom. I mean, every country has its own baby boom. Japan has its baby boom. And if you look at US, they have baby boom after World War II, right? So you have the consequences of a baby boom in terms of your fertility rate. However, what led to the situation today in China is not just the baby boom. It's what happened after the baby boom is over. For example, the US right now have a fertility rate of around 2, which is a very healthy fertility rate. You can say it's a sustainable fertility rate for a country to maintain its labor structure. But for China, it's another story. In my view, mostly it's about policy. As you mentioned, one-child policy. Let me share with you another interesting graph I found. That's I think it's a ticket, right? That's
the penalty.
It's a penalty ticket for
one
child policy in China.
The fine was, this is 1,500 back in 1991.
Yes.
What was the average salary for a family on a monthly basis back in 1991?
On a monthly average, I would guess around like 100 or 200.
Wow, a couple hundred.
Yeah, but
so the fine,
you have to notice
the penalty was like 15 times that.
Yeah, but I have noticed that this is in the village. It's in the countryside, not in the city.
Yeah.
So actually, the average income would be even lower at that time for farmer. So the penalty was really, really heavy. I think it's like almost 10 times of their annual salary or
definitely
annual income.
More than that.
Yeah. So the reason why this guy is getting a penalty is that this guy had more than one child, or maybe another child 1 year ago, and was found out by the administrations in their village. So that is why they give him the penalties. And if he refused to pay the penalty, as it says in this document, they will take over their properties in their houses and even take back their lands for farming. So that looks like a very serious crime in China at that time. That's what happened during one-child policies. And look at what happened now. We don't have one-child policy anymore, but people still don't want to give birth to children. Is that weird, right? Sounds very weird. But
it's actually not weird.
Well, it's
I can't totally relate.
Weird. Yeah, you can totally relate, but it's a weird thing because policy does not work anymore. Policy does not work in many areas in China right now, not only in fertility rate. If you take a look at the real estate, we had a housing bubble, right? We have a housing bubble in the past 20 years. And dating back 3 years ago, 4 years ago, almost everybody in China, in tier 1 cities, they want to buy houses. They want to buy their own homes. They want to live it up. They want to borrow money from the banks. The government is trying to, control the desire of everybody. So they set up all the restrictions. They do not allow you to buy more than one houses in tier 1 cities, in Beijing, in Shenzhen, in Shanghai. So it's just like one-child policies. You are not allowed to have more than one child. By comparison, you are not allowed to have more than one houses if you are single in tier 1 cities. So you know what happened afterwards? Everybody are allowed to have more than one houses, but they refuse to buy. It just looks very similar to our one-child policies. It's the policy. It's the policy because the policy changes so dramatically that it kills the confidence in resident. It kills our confidence, not only in real estate, but also in the issue of having kids.
And also, I don't think it's about confidence. I think the better way to put it is, it's just some things are just not changed by policy. It's not like you introduce some policies and I think you're right and I just follow it. I think ultimately people are looking for happiness, a secure life, and they want to live their life their own way. So if the policy directly address some economic concerns, for instance, if you cut the rates of the real estate, and I do have to buy a house, at least just one house, that's like a necessity, maybe that could boost some demand. But having kids or having a second home or doing more investment, that's just not something that is going to completely be driven by the policy. If I don't have the life satisfaction, if I don't feel like this is the right time to have the kid, I don't think any policy is going to change that. It's not just the confidence. I just don't think the policy address the ultimate needs of the human, right?
I'm an investor, so I put it in the framework of cost and benefit analysis. So what you are saying is that the cost is still very high. I mean, it might not have, like, the cost has not changed during the past 3 or 4 years. However, in my view, the cost actually declined a little bit.
I mean, the cost because of having the housing price are declining.
The housing prices are declining. When you mentioned having a kids, normally we would think about housing price, education, and all the medical care and the medical expenses that will coming along with having a kids. So the housing price actually decreased a little bit. Right now, if you are talking about going to school, I believe the cost of going to school is actually declining a little bit as well. So the cost overall is a little bit lower than it used to be. But the benefit side, as you said, the benefit is not significant enough for you to think about having kids right now, because you are more independent and you are, I mean, aside from being independent, you're actually seeking an inner sense of security, which you don't have right now. And by adding one more kids, you're actually losing more inner security, which makes you, pissed off. So more and more people like you are not actually having kids right now.
And actually, speaking of that, I think one of the most interesting phenomenon that's also related to what you were discussing is that you would notice that urban Chinese tend not to have kids, whereas if you look at people living in the suburban or village area, they do want to have kids, and it's not uncommon to see the rural people having more than one kid. I think that also explains the opportunity cost you were discussing, because for people living in the urban area, they see the rapid growth of China, and they believe that if I work harder and harder, there's going to be tremendous upside for me. At least that was true a couple of years before, 2023, 2024. So a lot of people would prioritize their career, especially for women, because pregnancy is like a year of hard work. It's not just something you just get easy with, right? So whereas for the people in the rural area, I'm not saying they don't have the upside, but compared to the people who live in the city, who have seen, all those affluent people making a success story that feels like magic, they probably would choose family, right? Because it's better to have a family that feels secure. And especially for the rural people, family means workforce.
Yes,
they
labor.
still have to farm, right?
As you put in the word labor.
Exactly. So I think that's also a huge factor that could partly explain why China is seeing such a dramatic decline of the birth rate, because the wealth gap in China is getting bigger and bigger. If you look at, for instance, the per capita GDP of the first tier cities, that's actually pretty close to developed economy. Whereas if you look at the per capita GDP in other areas of China, that still lags behind. Just imagine if you've seen a rapid growing country, if you grow up seeing that, you would probably want to catch up with opportunity, because this is sort of like the one thing life opportunity to really make the fortune, to really change your social class. If you don't do it now, you probably don't have that opportunity later in your life. So I think that explains a lot. If you look at Korea and Japan, yes, they do develop a lot after the Second World War, but I don't think the change is as drastic as China, because China went from like a completely poor country to today's China, where the first tier city have per capita GDP that's even closer to the developed nation. So I think that's huge, right? So if you've been through that changes, it's hard to let go of all the opportunity, because if you don't seize the opportunity, someone else is going to. Right.
Well, nobody sees the opportunity right now.
Right now, okay. I'm talking about maybe 2-3 years ago. That could still be the case.
Still, what you said actually makes sense. However, I want to go back to this chart. In your scenario, there should be a gradual decline in fertility rate. The curve should not decline in a dramatic way. So do you remember the youth unemployment rate in China? I think according to the official data, the highest number come to over 23, 24%. That really hurts me, because when I look at this number, and I've been thinking about this question. For example, if I have a kid, and my kid works really hard. I mean, he studied really hard. He go to Peking University, and he graduate, and then he find out that he cannot find a job. As you mentioned, it's called labor force in China because we want to have more labor. When you're talking about the structure changes in our fertility rate, we're talking about we're having less labor. So when I think about labor, when I think about the youth unemployment rate, that really hurts me because I don't want my kids to go through that process and then end up in nothing, end up in not be able to find a job. So that negative source would actually, just water out my desire to have a kid.
Right, especially considering the education system in China is excruciating sometimes, right? They put you in school from 7 to 10, and it's like a military style management.
Yeah.
And you have tons of homework. Yeah, I could really. I think when I was in primary school, that kind of stuff was not a general practice. I mean, some schools did it, but not every school. But it's getting more and more, prevalent in today's China. I don't understand what was going on, but
you know what they're learning?
Understand if
you know what they're learning in primary school? They're learning AI technologies. And they are doing those case studies on AI trend worldwide. Oh, that surprised me.
Yeah.
That's in primary school.
Yeah.
And after going through all the competitions, and eventually, most of them will find out that there are not enough jobs for them in the society.
I think Chinese education system is another great topic that we could probably discuss in a separate video.
Yeah. Well, going back to the fertility rate, when you look at the examples from Japan and from maybe South Korea, as we mentioned, that China is one of the lowest fertility rate in the worldwide. And the only country that is lower than us is South Korea, right? And Japan is another example because they have gone through all the, bubble bursting and very struggle 20 years. So I can totally understand why they have a lower fertility rate. But if you look at the example of South Korea, I don't think that's a very secure environment in terms of what they are facing from the north, in terms of all the geopolitical stuffs going on around that areas, and not mention that they also have a very high housing bubble issues, high living cost. So overall, that's not. I mean, in my view, it's not a very secure. I mean, in terms of the overall atmosphere, it's not a secure society, which would actually encourage me to have more kids. And going back to China, I think the main drivers of this dramatic decline in fertility rate is that people are losing the sense of security. And in order to have that sense of security, you need to have a very stable policy. It's just like stock market. If your policy is not stable, you will have higher and higher volatilities. And there will be no trend at all. It's just volatilities. So going back to fertility rate, you need to have a very stable policies. You cannot have one-child policies like 1 year ago, and you are giving me a very heavy penalty for having more children. And after 1 year, you are actually encouraging me to have, number 2, number 3 kids.
It's like an on and off switch.
I'll give you a very, very funny story. One of my friends, a few years ago, he was invited to join the government as sort of the outside counselor. And later, the government figured out that he had a child in Hong Kong. He had one child in mainland China and another one in Hong Kong. So basically, it's not illegal, but it's not encouraged by the one-child policies. So he was later refused by the government to include him as a counsel. Just after 2 years, the policy changed dramatically. And the government invited him to, give a speech about how to have more kids. And then they actually want to give him a medal for having more kids. So he was like, what's going on? Like 2 years ago, I was like a criminal. And 2 years later, I was on the stage, giving speeches and having these medals of having more child. That's ridiculous. So you need to have a very stable policies. So people will believe that it will not change.
Also, I think it's not just about the stable. I think you have to give smarter policy. You can't just treat people like they're stupid, right?
Yeah, that's a very good conclusion. That's a very good conclusion. Do you think
you can't just keep treating people like, okay, here's a switch, the press it on, everybody should come and look at the policy and obey whatever rights I introduce in the policy. You can't just treat people as if they're stupid. I think that's a core issue. Maybe for some things you can, but for a thing like fertility rates, whether people want to have kids, that's not just something you introduce a policy and just expect people will follow.
Yeah, it's right. Yes, right. Totally agree. It's not up to you. I mean, in other words, it's not up to you.
Exactly.
Just like the stock market, it's not up to you. You want it to go up, it will not go up. It's not up to you. So yeah, I like your conclusion, but after this episode was released, do you think we are still be safe?
It's okay, I guess.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Okay.
I think they know, but they don't have any other better idea. I mean, if you were the government, what would you do? If people don't want to have kids, you can't just force them to have kids, right?
No, you cannot force them to have kids, but you could have more like a social welfare system, more sounded social welfare system, as what they have done in Europe by giving money, by giving, just giving money to parents who are giving birth to babies. That will not boost up fertility rate. You need overall system to support them having a family, including healthcare, education, and even retirement system would also be very important.
Right. So speaking of that, actually, I have one good example done by government because I try to be objective. I don't just want to say everything you do is. But there's one good example by Hangzhou government because I heard that Hangzhou government is starting to allow people who are migrant workers, meaning those who don't have a Hangzhou 户口, to come to Hangzhou and their kids can go to the public school and they can buy housing without a 户口. So 户口 system in China basically say that if you don't have this some sort of registration or proof of residence in the particular city, you can't buy the school district house and your kids cannot go to the public school. And that's just a lot of burden, especially for the migrant worker, which is the majority of China's workforce in terms of the number, right? So imagine if you're a migrant worker, you came to a city like Hangzhou, the first tier, second tier city, whatever. You came to a big city to work and you start a family and you work really hard. And then you still have to worry about your kids going to school and you have to worry about the medical care, like you said. And of course, under that circumstances, I would reconsider if I want to have kids in the city. So right now, I think Hangzhou government is doing the right thing because they're realizing since the population is declining, we are not just looking at right now, we're looking at 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. Whichever province gets the talent, whichever province gets the inflow of the population is going to succeed in the future. So I think they're doing the right thing by removing this 户口 restriction. Yeah, so I think that's one of the example of the welfare programs you were referring to. And I believe that could be incredible benefit, especially for the migrant workers. If you're talking about financial burden, actually, the migrant workers are those who are undergoing most of the financial distress. Looking at the people who already have a 户口 in first tier city, or if you're born in the first tier city, they're probably actually doing okay because their parents are gonna pass on the real estate to the next generation. They probably don't even need to buy a house, but the migrant workers.
Yeah. Do you think they pass on the bank loan?
Yeah, that's true. But I'm just saying, like, relatively speaking, those who are born and raised in a more developed area in China are probably going to be better off just compared to the migrant workers or other, the population in China, right?
Absolutely. Actually the hukou system was inherited from Soviet Unions. Not many countries in the world have such system. It was originally designed to keep those farmers in the village and protect those workers in the cities. So there will be a war built between them and they cannot cross over. So it was a very old system and should be abandoned a long time ago.
Yeah, that should be gone.
Yeah,
absolutely.
When I was in college, like more than 10 years ago, 15, 16, 17 years ago, when I was in college, I was studying double majors in sociology. And one day I went to my professor's office and by accident, I read a piece of report on his desk. And that report is about a policy advice, very urgent one, to the central government that we should abandon one-child policies immediately. And I think that year was 2008, just after the Beijing Olympic Games that year. So I read the report in a very brief way, and I still remember there was one sentence written on the report says that this was the last year that we abandoned the one-child policy and still it will work, means we could, change the trend of our fertility rate and the dramatic change in our human structure. That's the last year we could do that. But nothing happened. I think they submitted the report and the leaders might read the report, but there was never any reply. So after 10 years, after I graduated, we abandoned one-child policies. So it's like 10 years late.
So you always have to wait until the last minute.
It's just like the real estate policy, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Everywhere you saw the housing price drops dramatically, then you change the housing policies. So should we give any conclusions from your side?
I don't think, in terms of the fertility rate, it's not something that you can just put a conclusion on because it's such a complex problem. And even apart from the policy, I think a lot of Chinese are experiencing some serious childhood trauma. And that's just something you have to consider. It's not just the policy, it's not just the economic concerns. Because China went through such a rapid growth, a lot of the kids growing up without sufficient companionship from their parents. The Chinese born in the 80s and 90s, even in 2000, they actually didn't get a chance to properly develop the intimate relationship with their parents. Either their parents are too busy or they sort of pass on the traditional value of the so-called 打是亲骂是爱, meaning they hit you to get things done. So that's not uncommon. And let's, apart from the policy, let's don't forget about some of the human stuff that's also creating huge impact on people's willingness to have the child. But it's better to be aware of those problems, and it's better to be aware that a policy on its own is not going to change anything because people don't just follow the policy whenever it's introduced. Right? It's a complicated social issue that needs more awareness from, different groups within the society.
I'll see you next episode.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great
Okay.
talk.
Bye-bye.
Bye.